Good evening. This meeting is open to the public and is available through an online platform. Please subscribe to the Township of Wilmot YouTube channel to watch the live stream or view after the meeting. We need a motion to reconvene, and that motion is that council reconvene in open session at 7 p.m. That is moved by Councillor Holland, Councillor Fenning. All in favor? That is carried. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the Wilmot Township meeting of Monday, May 31st, 2021. On behalf of Council, I would like to extend sincere and heartfelt condolences to the families and communities affected by the horrific mass grave in Kamloops. The loss of those children is felt nationwide. The truth of Canada's history has to be acknowledged, and we all need to do our part and commit to change. At this time, I would also like to acknowledge that tomorrow marks the beginning of National Indigenous History Month. I encourage everyone to spend time learning about this very important topic. So we'll take a moment to reflect on that, please. Thank you. I would like to now ask Councillor Fisher if he would read the land acknowledgement, please.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. Are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? So the first item is the recommendation that the minutes of the following meetings be adopted as presented. Regular council meeting, May 17, 2021. That is moved by Councillor Fenning and Councillor Fisher. Are there any corrections, omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. First item is a public meeting. This is a public meeting held in accordance with the provisions of Section 12 of the Development Charges Act 1997 as amended to hear input on the development charges background study. We will hear all interested people who wish to speak. I now declare the public meeting open. So persons attending as delegations at this meeting are required to leave their names and addresses, which will become part of the public record. And you are hereby advised that this information may be posted on the township's official website, along with your email address if provided. So, Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. This public meeting is being held to obtain input on the township's proposed update to our development charges, background study, and bylaw. In the summer of 2019, Wilmot Council approved DC bylaw 2019/42. Since that time, a number of significant growth-related studies have been updated, most notably the strategic plan, fire master plan, and ice needs study. Over the past several months, staff have worked with our consultants, Andrew and Tina from Watson and Associates, to update our anticipated capital needs over the long term, and with Watson completing updates to DC calculations. Following this public meeting, the bylaw will be brought forward for formal approval on July the 12th, 2021. It's now my pleasure to introduce Andrew Grunda of Watson and Associates, who is here to present the study findings at this public meeting. Thank you.
Welcome, Andrew. You may proceed, sir.
Thank you very much. And I believe the municipality is operating the PowerPoint presentation this evening.
Yeah, it's up on the screen now.
That's great. Thank you. So pleasure to be here for the public meeting and to present to council this evening. The intent of the public meeting is, as mentioned in the introduction, an amendment to the township's 2019 DC bylaw. If you can commence to the next slide, you will see that this is a statutory requirement of the Development Charges Act, that if the municipality wishes to amend its current bylaw, that it does so in accordance with the requirements of the Development Charges Act, whereby a background study must be prepared and made available to the public on the website at least 60 days before council gives consideration to adopting the amending bylaw. It also requires that the municipality hold at least one public meeting to hear from the public on the matter and to give council feedback before ultimately considering and deliberating on passing the amending bylaw. The intent of the background study and proposed amending bylaw is twofold. As mentioned in the introduction, it's meant to address changes in the underlying capital needs and capital cost estimates in the 2019 background study. And in addition to that, there has been amendments made to the Development Charges Act recently that also require amendments to the bylaw to make sure that it continues to be in accordance with the legislation. As you'll see on the next page of the presentation, the municipality's bylaw that was passed on August 31st, or came into effect on August 31st, 2019, is bylaw 2019-42. That bylaw will remain in effect other than the amendments that are presented in the background study and the proposed amending bylaw. As I've mentioned, some of the changes that are identified in the background study and in the proposed amending bylaw is to address amendments to the Development Charges Act. Those amendments occurred as a result of the More Homes, More Choice Act and the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act. The most significant revisions that came out of those legislative amendments was to now identify the permitted eligible services. The services currently under the Township's 2019 bylaw remain eligible and are continued to be included in the amending bylaw. Also in the prior legislation, soft services such as parks and recreation, library, for example, required a 10% deduction to be made to the growth-related costs and have that cost funded by taxes. That has since been removed, and so one of the intent of the amending bylaw is to add back in that funding and increase the charges for those services. Also, The amendments to the Development Charges Act have also changed the timing and collection policies of the bylaw, which I'll refer to later in the presentation, as well as the changes to the underlying capital needs and capital cost estimates that was referred to earlier. So on the next page, you will see, again, the changes that are specifically identified in the amending bylaw. Firstly is to remove the 10% statutory deduction that had been acknowledged in 2019 for library services, parks and recreation services, and growth-related studies. There's also a number of updates to capital needs and capital cost estimates for the remaining services of roads, fire, parks and recreation, library, water, wastewater, and related growth-related studies. Again, those come from updated actual cost experience by the township, as well as budgeted expenditures for capital purposes, updated studies such as the fire master plan that was completed in December of 2020. Those all serve to inform the change in the underlying capital need and associated costs. Another amendment that you see included in the background study is that the current bylaw has a service referred to as administrative services, which includes growth-related studies such as official plan updates, for example. That is no longer a permitted service, although those studies are permitted capital expenditures. And so those costs of studies have been reallocated into the respective eligible services of the bylaw. So other than those changes in the policies that we'll refer to later in the presentation, all other aspects of the existing 2019 bylaw remain unchanged as a result of the amendment. So on the next page, you'll see a table that summarizes the DC eligible costs in the 2019 DC background study and the updated DC eligible costs as a result of this background study for purposes of amendment. I would highlight that the costs you see presented here are all denominated in 2019 values, which is the base year of the bylaw. And so to comply with the amendment, they have to be presented as such, and the 2019 schedule of charges be recalculated and then subsequently indexed for implementation. You'll see that the total DC recoverable costs across all eligible services in the 2019 DC background study totaled approximately $21.8 million. The updated needs and capital cost estimates would see that increase to $42.8 million, or an increase of about $21 million overall, about 96% increase in the total DC recoverable costs. When you look at them by service, the most significant increases are for hard services of water, sewer, and roads, representing about $16 million of the $21 million in the increase. The 10% statutory deduction that's been removed provides about an additional $1 million in funding for parks, recreation, library, and studies that is now eligible and has been included. And what we've also identified in discussions with the township is to also include anticipated cash flow costs of financing. And so you'll see in the background study approximately $450,000 in anticipated financing costs have also been added to the capital costs of principal for the purposes of implementing the proposed charges. And so the proposed charges that you'll see on the next slide, this would replace the schedule in the 2019 bylaw. We've maintained the same structure of the charge, so the charge is differentiated by residential dwelling unit based on the underlying occupancy exhibited in those dwelling unit types. So you'll see the residential units are differentiated between low density single and semi-detached units, high density apartments, depending on the number of bedrooms in the respective apartment dwellings, townhouse dwelling units, and lodging units. The non-residential charge is also differentiated between industrial needs compared to commercial and institutional needs based again on the underlying occupancy and density of those lands. The residential charge for single and semi-detached is as they are for the other dwelling units identified by service. You'll see that that charge in the urban serviced area, which is fully provided with water and wastewater services, would have a charge of $23,146 per unit. By comparison, based on the underlying occupancy, a bachelor or one-bedroom apartment in the fully serviced area would be approximately $9,700 per unit. The non-residential charge, which is imposed based on the gross floor area of building construction, would be $6.60 per square foot for industrial, $10.15 in the urban serviced area for commercial and institutional developments. And so to provide a context for those charges, as you'll see on the next table, there is a comparison of the charges for a single detached unit today compared to the proposed charges through the amending bylaw. So the charge in the fully urban serviced area today is $12,117 for the township. That would increase to $23,146 per unit as identified earlier, an increase of just over $11,000 per unit, or about a 91% increase in the overall charge. The non-residential charges, as you'll see presented on the next table, show a comparison for industrial and commercial and institutional development charges. The current industrial charge per square foot in the fully urban serviced area is $2.61 today. That would increase by just under $4 a square foot to $6.60 a square foot. And for commercial and institutional, the current charge of $4.50 would increase by about $5.65 per square foot to $10.15. So with those impacts, again, identified in detail in the DC background study, those are the proposed charges for the amending bylaw to increase funding to pay for the anticipated capital needs of the respective services. If you can forward 2 slides, you'll see we've also identified the policy changes. So other than the policies referred to in the background study and summarized in our presentation this evening, all other policies would remain unchanged in the bylaw. And largely what these policy changes reflect are the amendments to the Development Charges Act that all municipalities have to now adhere to. And so the changes that are now statutorily required is that while the bylaw requires that development charges be calculated and paid in full at the time of the first building permit being issued, the rules will be slightly different with respect to certain types of development. So firstly, if the development is for rental housing or institutional development as defined under the Act, the charges will no longer be paid in full at the time of building permit issuance, but rather the charge will be paid in 6 annual installments over 5 years, with the first one commencing on the date of occupancy. If the development is for not-for-profit housing, similar rules would apply. However, it would be payable in 21 annual installments over 20 years commencing on the date of occupancy. Also, under the current bylaw today, as I've mentioned, when a development comes forward for issuance of a building permit, the schedule of charges that are in effect at that time are consulted and used to calculate the charges payable. A change with respect to the rules in that regard is that if that building permit is as a result of a site plan or zoning bylaw amendment planning approval, and that approval occurred within 2 years of the building permit issuance, and those applications were submitted on or after January 1st of 2020, then the charges will no longer be calculated based on the rates in effect at the time of building permit issuance, but rather will be calculated based on the charges that were in effect on the date they submitted the planning application. So that does have the impact of grandfathering in charges for applicants who've submitted those site plan and zoning bylaw amendments during that period of time. In that regard, as you'll see on the next page, the charges for the installments and for the determination of the charge for site plan and zoning bylaw allow the municipality to impose interest charges on those payment times. The municipality has an interest rate policy, which has been used for the purpose of determining the rate and how it will be applied. And so the township, consistent with the other area municipalities in the region, will impose the rate of the Bank of Canada prime rate plus 2%. That interest rate will be fixed for the duration of the installment payments and calculated either at the earlier that the time the DC is calculated or the first payment is due. Also, the policy makes provision that no interest will be applied on the not-for-profit housing installment development charges. On the next page, you'll see the changes to the policy with respect to statutory exemptions. So under the Development Charges Act, it allows council to provide what is referred to as non-statutory exemptions, exempting any types or locations of development from payment of the charges as council deems fit. Those are identified and included in the 2019 bylaw. However, in addition to that, the Act does require that there are certain types of development that are exempt from payment. Historically, it provided for residential intensification exemptions within existing residential buildings, meaning that if you had an existing residential building, you were allowed to add up to at least 2 additional apartment units, depending on the type of building, as long as those apartment units were within the existing building, they would be exempt from payment. The rules have changed slightly in that regard. While those provisions still exist, they've also been extended that the additional dwelling units can be ancillary to the principal existing residential building and also be exempt. So for example, if somebody was building a granny flat on the same property, but detached from a single family home as an example, that dwelling unit would be exempt from payment of development charges under the new rules. Also, if there is new development, similar rules apply that they're allowed to add 1 additional dwelling unit either within the new building or ancillary to that building on the same lot, and it would be exempt from payment of the development charge as well. Lastly, the other policy change that you'll see identified is that because of those new statutory exemptions on the next page, you'll see that the temporary use exemption that is currently in the bylaw no longer needs to be there, and that it is duplicative relative to those statutory exemptions. And so as a matter of housekeeping, that has been removed for consistency. So that concludes my presentation. If you would forward 2 slides forwards, you'll see the next steps in the process. And those are obviously to receive input from the public on the matter before council considers the amending bylaw to come forward for adoption on July 12th, at which time the amended charges and policies would come into effect. And so that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Just provide some conclusion comments there before we open up for questions, Mayor Armstrong. Is that all right? Yep. So through you, Mayor Armstrong, thank you, Andrew, for the presentation, obviously, and for all the work from Watson over the past several months pulling this together. Just, I guess, to provide some context for council. As you'll see, the increase to development charges seems rather significant at this point in time. This was obviously something that was well known during the last update. We were expecting significant increases coming, which we communicated with council at that time. We were waiting on the results of the studies that feed into this this process on growth-related capital costs, as Andrew outlined, the addition of a new fire station requirement under the fire master plan, and updates to a lot of the sanitary studies, and also growth-related infrastructure throughout the municipality are what are driving the change. The change does bring us more in line with other municipalities that are in a high growth area. And we're obviously as staff supportive of the recommendations within this. It has been available for comment since April the 30th, so over a month right now, and we have had 0 delegations tonight and 0 feedback on it yet, which is indicative of the support from the community thus far. So we expect to bring it forward on, like as Andrew said, on July the 12th for formal approval, and we're here for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I will declare that the open public meeting is closed, and that we have a recommendation that report COR 2021-021 as prepared by the Director of Corporate Services / Treasurer regarding the development charge background study update be received for information purposes. That is moved by Councillor Fenning, Councillor Gordick. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Andrew. Have a good evening. So next we have a presentation for the Cultural Heritage Landscape Study. Who's going to introduce? Mr. Okrafka?
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. Just briefly, the report is fairly self-explanatory. It's a project that Ms. Locke and myself are excited about, and we'd like to welcome Christopher de Geer from the University of Waterloo Heritage Resource Centre tonight to present to Council, and Ms. Locke and myself would be happy to answer any questions following the presentation along with Mr. de Geer. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you. I believe there are some slides that accompany this. Great. Okay, so Mr. Mayor and members of council, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present on this important and exciting cultural heritage landscape study that's taking place in the townships of Wilmot and North Dumfries. As the introduction states, yes, my name is Christopher de Geer, and I'm a researcher with the Heritage Resources Centre at the University of Waterloo. In this brief presentation, I'll be covering the definition of cultural heritage landscapes, some of the reasons why they're important assets in the townships, and providing some background on work that has already taken place in the region of Waterloo. I'll also be discussing the current study, the methods of data collection, and how you can participate. So next slide, please. Like many land use policy arenas, cultural landscapes are the subject of multi-level policy. Internationally, they are recognized in the World Heritage Convention, nationally in Canada's standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places, provincially in Ontario's provincial policy statement, and regionally in official plans. The provincial policy statement establishes that significant cultural heritage landscapes shall be conserved. That document defines a cultural heritage landscape as a geographic area that may have been modified by human activity and is identified as having cultural heritage value or interest by a community, including an Indigenous community. The area may include features such as buildings, structures, spaces, views, archaeological sites, or natural elements that are valued together for their interrelationship, meaning, or association. Thus, a cultural heritage landscape can be a variety of both single and multiple property types, ranging from predominantly natural areas to more industrial areas. What is important is that they're valued by the community for contributing to our understanding of people, places, and events. Next slide, please. So why conserve cultural heritage landscapes? They can help maintain a sense of place, community, and individual identity. They can ensure continuity with the past, which promotes creativity and cultural diversity, and they can enhance the quality of life in the community, supporting social services and promoting economic prosperity. Moreover, cultural landscapes embody the interrelationships between people and the natural environment and can illustrate how culture and nature co-evolve to form distinct, character-rich environments. They're places we identify as home and places we're proud of. Next slide, please. Since the advent of cultural heritage landscape policy in the PPS, municipalities across Ontario have conducted inventories of cultural heritage landscapes. The region of Waterloo has been an early adopter of cultural landscape planning and has developed several documents to help guide identification and conservation in the region, two of which are shown on the left-hand side of the screen. These documents establish the procedures for identifying, inventorying, and evaluating, designating, and conserving CHLs in the region. Since the publication of those documents, the City of Kitchener and Waterloo have conducted cultural heritage landscape inventories. And in 2018, I was privileged to work on a project identifying candidate cultural heritage landscapes in Wellesley and Woolwich. Importantly, with each of those inventories, as with the current study, work remains after the report is submitted to either designate or list the landscape on the Municipal Heritage Register, which might require a technical study, an official plan amendment, and cultural heritage landscape impact assessment policies. Next slide, please. So the current study is a collaborative endeavor between the Township of Wilmot, the region of Waterloo, and the Heritage Resources Centre at the University of Waterloo. The approach used in our study is slightly different than those employed in Kitchener and the Waterloo inventories. So while this study does include historical research, site surveys, and screening of preliminary sites against criteria, we differ by putting community consultation and engagement at the forefront of the study. So though our community outreach has been somewhat complicated due to COVID-19, we are forging ahead with a web-based survey on the Waterloo Region Engage page. We're doing one-on-one interviews online for the time being, and we have a mail-out community action kit as well. Each of these methods includes a participatory mapping exercise where we ask community members to identify candidate CHLs on a map, and we then overlay those responses to identify areas of widespread community agreement. On the right side of the screen is an image of aggregated mapping data from the study conducted in Wellesley and Woolwich. The darker shades of red correspond to the number of participants who have identified an area as a candidate CHL. The results from the mapping exercises are not only essential to developing a defensible demonstration of valued by community as per the PPS, but it also provides for more thorough understanding of the landscape than can be captured through site surveys and historical research alone. Next slide, please. So community engagement and historical research has already begun and will be carried into the early winter of this year. And today I would like to ask for your participation and for you to please share your knowledge of the study with any of your constituents or colleagues who are interested in conserving their irreplaceable cultural heritage landscapes in the township. Next slide, please. So if you're interested in getting involved, you can, if you're interested in getting involved with an interview, please contact me. For the online survey, you can please visit the Region of Waterloo Engage page or follow the link on the previous slide. And yes, then the last slide, please. And again, I'd like to say thank you very much. And if it pleases council, I will happily answer any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Christopher? Councillor Holman.
Thank you, through the chair. Christopher, thanks for that great presentation. I'm really looking forward to this project. I'm just wondering if you can provide more details on how you engage or the Indigenous community is actively involved in this process.
Thank you very much for that question, Councillor Holman. Through you, Mr. Mayor. We have an outreach strategy in place for engaging with Indigenous communities. Through the Six Nations Land and Resources Department, potentially through the Six Nations Elected Council, the Haudenosaunee Development Institute, and the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation Department of Consultation and Accommodation. However, I would also ask that if anybody can help forge these relationships, we are more than welcome to working with you all, and it would be really great if you could help us in that regard. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Councillor Gordick.
To follow up on that through the mayor to Mr. DeGreer, with regards to the Indigenous landmarks that are here, if people aren't aware of them, based on your mapping and your data collection, how would you sort of have those take some sort of preference? For example, if there was like a burial site that perhaps we don't know about that becomes culturally significant, but it's not historically known, so people can't put that into the cultural survey to make it known and to be mapped with the proper data to make it sort of important, have relevance to the actual data collection.
Thank you very much for the question. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't rely exclusively on the community mapping to identify the boundaries of the candidate cultural heritage landscapes. Some of it is still subjectively done through the research team. So there's opportunity for those areas to enter into the study in those ways. And there's also instances where some of those resources might actually, it might be preferred to keep them unknown or to keep them not secretive, but as they are now. And that is ultimately, in my opinion, up to the First Nations involved. However, I will be working closely with Bridget Cody at the Region of Waterloo with this, and of course welcome her guidance on that as well.
Follow up then through that. I understand the secretive part, totally appreciate that response. I guess more what I was thinking is if there was something that, say for example, protecting parts of the Haldeman Tract that are within the Waterloo region. So not everybody would know where that is or the significance of it. So that definitely is not secret. but just the idea being is that we wouldn't want to have that destroyed any more than perhaps that it already is. So that was where I was kind of coming from for that perspective.
Yes, thank you for the question. And in the previous study that was conducted in Wellesley and Woolwich, of course, goes the Haldeman Tract also grows through Woolwich. And with the engagement with the Six Nations that we did in that study, it was made pretty clear that it was difficult for them to identify a place on the map as holding more value than any other place because the landscape was valued equally across the map that we presented. And that includes the Haldeman Tract and beyond. So, of course, in the reports that I author for this study, those things get kind of a front burner. They're obviously really important, and they're ongoing parts of I think the reconciliation that we as Canadians, as a nation, are hoping to achieve. So I personally ensure that those items are prioritized and at the front of a report. So even if it weren't to be captured by participants to the study, it would still certainly find a central position in the reporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christopher. Councillor Fanning.
I just want to say thank you, because I'm really looking forward to this coming forward, and especially looking forward to the result.
Thank you very much. And through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm also really looking forward to working on this study. It's exciting landscapes with some really exciting history and some really great communities. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Christopher. Mr. Okrafka.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, I just wanted to add for the residents who are watching that we have added a link button on the Township of Wilmot homepage. So right when you go to the first page, there's a link to the study that will take you to the Engage Waterloo Region page to participate. So just thought I'd mention that we do have a simple way for residents to participate and join that online exercise. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Hopefully we get lots of response. That's what we're looking for. So, well, thank you again, Christopher. Appreciate your input and look forward to the final reports. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Good night.
So we do have a recommendation to go with that. The council receives report DS 2021-020 for information. That is moved by Councillor Gordick, Councillor Fanning. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. So there are no delegations. We have the consent agenda. There's one item on the consent agenda. And if there's no discussion, the recommendation that report number ILS 2021-22 be approved. That is moved by Councillor Fisher, Councillor Fanning. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next item is from Parks and Facilities, the RFT Award Administration Building. Ms. Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. So a little bit of background for members of council. You may recall recently we awarded design and project oversight to BML Engineering, and that is to replace the boiler system and the HVAC equipment for the admin building and Castle Kilbride. And this is a result of reviews that were done last year for air quality and fresh air supply to the building. It was determined upon inspection from a third-party consultant that all of the equipment at that facility was at end of life and in need of replacement. So the design has now been completed and the RFT was issued. So this report outlines that unfortunately the pricing came in significantly higher than staff anticipated and higher than the estimates that we received last year. We do know that there are impacts from COVID with respect to material and component supplies. We also have determined that contractors in this industry are quite busy. We had 20 packages picked up, but only 3 bids were received. So that's an indication of the ability for folks in the industry to be able to support this type of project. So the cost of the project, it came in at $863,216, including the previous commitments to the design consultant. And we have been able to, through the magic wand of our Director of Corporate Services, we have been able to finance this without going back into other funds. The funding will be split between the Canada Infrastructure Program, which is $224,000 towards the project. We had $54,000 already identified in the facilities reserve. We had $35,000 showing in the 2019 capital levy for replacement of the boiler. And the balance of the funding will be from the Canada Community Build Fund. And this means using most of the funding that came through from that fund leaves about $76,000 in unallocated dollars for other projects. So although there are components of this project that we could split out and do in future years, it's really important to have air quality improvements in this building and fresh airflow improvements so that when staff return to the office on a full-time basis, that we are taking care of their health and well-being. With the spread of COVID being linked to being an airborne virus, it's even more critical now than ever. So although it is utilizing a lot of the community building fund to complete this project, staff is recommending to council that we proceed with this full project and getting all of this work completed in 2021, so that as we move into later in the year and bring staff back, that the building is healthy. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. It's certainly important to have some fresh air, and hopefully we can get staff back in here before too long. Councillor Holman.
Thank you, for the chair. I gulped a couple of times when I was reading this report, but it's absolutely necessary. And I only highlight my comment for the public as well, because there are often decisions that we have to make and that are expensive, but they are to protect the health and well-being of, the people in our community. So we need to do this. So these are the things that, aren't popular to talk about. And, it's not a splash pad, it's not a park, but it is absolutely necessary for the health and well-being of our community.
Thank you. Councillor Fenning.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. I'm just wondering, Director, Acting CAO, whether you can comment on the expected life span of the system at all. Recognizing that so many of the components, as noted in the report, are at end of life now, and how old are some of these things?
Sure, Councillor Fenning, through the Mayor. The equipment that we're replacing is all original to the construction of the admin building, so 1994. So it is almost 30 years old, if I'm doing my math correctly. That's Patrick's job, the math. Yeah, so it's well at end of life. The new equipment that we're bringing in, of course, has the standard 1-year warranty, parts and labor, but the expected life is likely, should be 20 years, should be. That would be my estimate. Sometimes equipment is built differently, but we are doing our best to ensure through our consultant that we are selecting the highest quality equipment that we can afford. And he specifically specified brands to ensure that it's good quality. So.
Thank you. See no further questions. So the recommendation that RFT 2021-22 be awarded to Keith's Plumbing and Heating, Inc. for the supply and installation of new HVAC and boiler equipment as per their submission dated May 18, 2021, in the amount of $930,313, including HST. That is moved by Councillor Fenning, seconded by Councillor Gordick. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. No correspondence, no bylaws, no notice of motion, announcements. I think I will start with one that the Pride flag, having to do with Pride Month and the raising of the Pride flag. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, the flag will be raised here at the admin building, and all the other buildings will be done on the 9th. The flags are currently at half-mast, and all the other flag poles would require the flag to be below the Canadian flag, and that would be, unfortunately, that would make them susceptible to possible damage or theft. So on the 9th, we will raise the rest of the flags around the township, but tomorrow here at the administration building, we will be raising the Pride flag on a single pole. So that's just for everyone's information. The unfortunate thing is we can't have a gathering or a ceremony to do so. The maximum we can have is 5 people attending. So just so everybody's aware. Start with Councillor Fenning. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Tonight, I want to read a letter that I wrote to our Prime Minister. I won't read all of it because some of it may be difficult for some people listening to hear. And of course, it's on the subject of the discovery of the 215 children. So a warning for anyone who doesn't wish to hear things that are difficult. I know this is a difficult thing for me. So it's an emotional trigger warning. Dear Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, I am writing to you today as a mother. A warning, what I have to say is very painful. I would not wish to catch you off guard. I know your family has also experienced loss and your mother has endured the hell I know. While each loss we experience is unique, there is a resonance between them and a commonality of pain that binds us together as mothers of children who have died, and another layer of commonality in having to search for them. Many of you in the community, there's a part that I took out for the benefit of people watching, and I will share something else. Many of you in the community know the story I shared in this letter to the Prime Minister. My husband and I lost our son in 2018, and the ensuing search was the worst time of my life. It was also a time that I experienced the incredible strength and love this community has to offer. We searched for 3 days. And back to what I wrote in the letter. I searched knowing he was dead. I searched knowing his body was the only thing left of him in our world. I searched because I needed truth. I needed closure. For over 100 years, mothers and families have been denied this closure for the children stolen by the residential school system. Just a few days ago, the discovery of 215 precious children's bodies hit me like a tidal wave of pain. I am not Indigenous. I'm just another grieving mother who has a tiny glimpse of the horror that those mothers suffered. We claim these children and their families as Canadian citizens, but they were denied the comfort of community and all the support systems that were there for my family in our loss. I am begging you to commit the resources to find the rest of the children who were buried without names, without care, torn from their families and discarded like they did not matter. Nothing we do can bring them back, but we can give them their names, give them their families, give the families the tiniest bit of comfort that truth may offer. The tools exist, and we know where to look. We cannot deny them and hold our heads up. Lowering flags, wearing orange, declaring days of mourning and recognition are meaningless if we do not act. Writing to you in solidarity with the Indigenous mothers and families. I would like to ask that any of you who wish to support would send messages to support this call for action. And I know that around the country, across the country, there are petitions of various kinds asking for something similar. So I'm asking everyone watching and everyone here around our virtual horseshoe to ask for action in solidarity with our Indigenous community.
Thank you, Councillor Fenning. Councillor Holman.
Thank you for the chair. Actually, it's going to, we missed notice of motions, and I have a notice of motion for this evening. Wilmot Township Council and staff stand with all impacted family members and community members in the wake of the discovery of the remains of 250 Indigenous children whose lives were stolen at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. We are calling for truth for the Indigenous people in Canada. Whereas the bodies of 250 children were recently found at a residential school, be it resolved that the flags at every Township of Wilmot building be lowered for 1 hour for each child discovered. Furthermore, that Wilmot Township Council call upon the provincial and federal government of Canada to take action immediately in search for the remains of Indigenous children on the grounds of all 139 former historic Indian residential schools in Canada, as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada 2008 demands the truth. Thank you.
Thank you.
If she wants, if that's what council's looking for, with a 2/3 majority.
So the motion is here. What we need is, because we didn't get it in advance, what we need is 2/3 majority of council to allow us to proceed to address the motion tonight. So do we want a motion for that?
A motion to proceed with Councillor Holman's motion this evening.
Okay, so we'll need a motion to proceed with Councillor Holman's motion. And that is moved by Councillor Gerber and Councillor Gordick. All in favor? Okay, So the motion is as read by Councillor Hallman, and I'm assuming she's moving the motion, and that is being seconded by Councillor Fenning. And there's any comment to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. Councillor Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, the Baden Community Association had a drive-through food bank drive on Saturday, and the community came through in a big way again. We filled up the back of a pickup truck and the back of a SUV, and this food drive was targeting some of the items that food banks generally don't get, which means not pasta or, and people were handing in bags of laundry detergent and dish detergent, and it was really heartening to see how much people came and gave. So, and also the Wilmot Heritage Fire Brigades also had their bottle drive the same time, so a little busy in Baden considering the times.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. Are there any other announcements? Okay, Councillor Gordick.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. I just wanted to say that it's been a hard weekend to sort of process all of the news that came out and the pain of our community. And I just wanted to say thank you to Councillor Fenning for her words. It's one of the reasons I didn't want to speak, because I understand, I can empathize being what she's gone through and to hear her words. So thank you for sharing and bringing a voice to some of the pain that our community is feeling, and for having the strength to reach out to the Prime Minister and other members of Parliament to push forward something that can be done to help the community in this process. So I just wanted to say, my heart is breaking and I don't really have a lot of words. So I just want to say thanks to both Councillor Fenning and Councillor Hallman for bringing forward those motions. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Gordick. And there's no further announcements. And the next item is the business arising from the closed session from May 20th, 2021. Recommendation that the Talent Company Limited be awarded a contract for executive recruitment services for the upset limit of $60,000 plus HST, and further that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute contract documents with the Talent Company Limited. Moved by Councillor Fenning, Councillor Hallman. Excuse me. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next item is the confirmatory bylaw. Recommendation that bylaw number 2021-29 to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held on May 31st, 2021 be introduced, read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed in open council. That is moved by Councillor Fisher, Councillor Gerber. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And the next motion is that we do now adjourn to meet again at the call of the mayor. That is moved by Councillor Gordick, Councillor Hallman. All in favor? That is carried. And that's it. Thank you, everyone, for attending. and want to wish everyone a safe drive home. Thank you.